The first time Daniel felt truly invisible was not when people ignored him, but when he ignored himself. It happened on a stage filled with light, where a microphone waited patiently for his voice. His heart raced, his hands shook, and his mind went completely blank. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. He could feel the judgment before it was ever spoken. In that moment, he wasn't afraid of failing in front of people. He was afraid of confirming what he had secretly believed for years. That he was not good enough. He stepped back, muttered an apology, and walked away. The silence that followed him home, sat beside him in the dark, and stared back at him from the mirror. That night, something cracked inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Daniel had lived most of his life shrinking himself to fit into places that were never too small for him, only too uncomfortable. He learned early that staying quiet felt safer than being judged. Every time he had an idea, a voice inside whispered that it wasn't worth sharing. Every time he dreamed of more, another voice warned him not to aim too high. Over time, those voices grew stronger, and his own grew weaker. At work, he watched others speak with confidence, even when they were wrong, while he stayed silent even when he was right. In relationships, he became the one who always understood, always adjusted, always gave more than he received. People praised him for being humble, but humility slowly turned into self-erasure. After the night on the stage, Daniel couldn't escape the truth anymore. He realized that his life was not limited by lack of talent or opportunity, but by lack of belief. He had been waiting for confidence to appear before taking action, not realizing that confidence is built only after action is taken. The next morning, nothing felt different. Fear was still there. Doubt still sat heavily in his chest. But for the first time, he made a small promise to himself. He would no longer let fear make his decisions. The changes were uncomfortable and often awkward. In meetings, he forced himself to speak even when his voice trembled. Sometimes his ideas were ignored. Sometimes they were challenged. Sometimes they were accepted. But each time he spoke, something shifted inside him. He began to understand that rejection was not fatal, and silence was not safety. He started setting small boundaries, saying no when he meant no, and expressing opinions without apologizing for having them. At first, it felt unnatural, almost selfish. But slowly, it began to feel honest. There were days when Daniel felt like he was pretending, like he was wearing confidence instead of owning it. On those days, the old voice returned, telling him that people would eventually see through him. But he kept going. He learned that confidence is not the absence of insecurity, but the decision not to be ruled by it. Every small act of courage added weight to his presence. He stood a little straighter. He met people's eyes. He stopped explaining himself excessively. And with each step, the world responded differently, not because it had changed, but because he had. Then came a moment that tested everything he had built. An opportunity appeared that would place him back in the very situation that once broke him. A larger stage, a larger audience, and far more to lose. Fear returned instantly, stronger than ever. His mind replayed the memory of failure, magnifying it, convincing him that history would repeat itself. For days, he considered walking away. No one would blame him. Staying comfortable was still an option. But deep down, Daniel knew that turning back would cost him more than failing ever could. He remembered how it felt to live quietly, safely, and unfulfilled. He realized that confidence grows only when it is challenged, never when it is protected. So he said yes. When the day arrived, his heart pounded just as hard as it had before. His hands still shook. But this time, he did not run. He stepped forward and spoke, not with perfection, but with honesty. He stumbled once or twice, but he didn't stop. He breathed through the fear and kept going. When he finished, the applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real. More importantly, he felt something he had never felt before, pride. Not because he had been flawless, but because he had been brave. From that day on, Daniel's life didn't suddenly become easy. He still faced rejection. He still doubted himself at times. But something fundamental had changed. He no longer saw confidence as something other people were born with and he was not. He understood it as a skill, built slowly through choice, failure, and persistence. He stopped asking himself whether he was enough and started asking whether he was willing to try. Over time, opportunities found him not because he chased them desperately, but because he finally believed he deserved them. His relationships became more balanced. His work gained visibility. But the greatest transformation was internal. He stopped seeking approval from everyone and started trusting himself. He learned that self-confidence doesn't make you better than others, but it does free you from needing their validation. Years later, when Daniel walked onto another stage, the microphone no longer scared him. Not because fear was gone, but because it no longer controlled him. He had learned the truth that changes lives. Self-confidence is not about being fearless, perfect, or loud. It is about standing in your truth, even when your voice shakes, and choosing to believe in yourself when no one else does. The first time Daniel truly understood how deeply fear had shaped his life was not when he failed publicly, but when he realized how long he had been failing quietly. The stage incident was only a mirror, reflecting years of self-doubt that had already decided his limits. When he stood there frozen, unable to speak, it felt like his entire past had gathered in that single moment. Every time he stayed silent, every time he let someone else step ahead, every time he convinced himself that he didn't deserve more, all of it pressed down on him at once. Walking away from that stage was not just an exit from a room, it was an escape from himself, and it hurt more than he expected. For most of his life, Daniel had believed that confidence was something you were either born with or without. He watched people who spoke effortlessly, who demanded space without apology, and he assumed they possessed something he lacked. So he learned to adapt. He became agreeable. He became reliable. He became the person who never caused discomfort, even if it meant swallowing his own truth. At first, this felt like maturity. Over time, it became a cage. The more he avoided judgment, the more he avoided growth. And slowly, without noticing, he stopped trusting his own voice. After the night everything fell apart, Daniel sat alone replaying the moment again and again. What haunted him wasn't the silence on stage, but the certainty that if he did nothing, his life would continue in that same silent pattern. He realized that fear had promised him safety, but delivered emptiness. That realization didn't give him confidence, but it gave him clarity. He didn't need to become someone else. He needed to stop abandoning himself. Change did not arrive dramatically. It came in small, uncomfortable decisions. The first time he raised his hand in a meeting, his heart raced as if danger were real. When someone disagreed with him, his chest tightened, but he stayed present. Sometimes his ideas went nowhere. Sometimes they sparked conversations. But the real victory was internal. Each time he spoke, he proved to himself that fear could exist without disaster following it. Slowly, he stopped seeing discomfort as a warning and started seeing it as a sign of growth. There were moments when the old habits pulled him back. Days when he replayed conversations, worrying about how he sounded. Nights when he questioned whether he was overstepping. On those days, confidence felt like a lie he was trying to tell himself. But he kept showing up. He learned that confidence is not a feeling you wait for, but a relationship you build with yourself. Trust grows when promises are kept, even small ones. And he began keeping them. As Daniel's behavior changed, so did the way people treated him. Not because they suddenly became kinder, but because he stopped giving them permission to overlook him. He no longer rushed to explain himself. He paused before responding. He listened without shrinking. Some people were uncomfortable with the change. Others respected it. And for the first time, Daniel accepted that not everyone needed to like him for his life to move forward. Then came the opportunity that forced him to confront his past head-on. It was bigger than anything he had attempted before, and it placed him directly in the environment he once associated with humiliation. Fear returned immediately, loud and convincing. It reminded him of every mistake, every awkward moment, every time he had doubted himself. Walking away would have been easy. Familiar. Safe. But he understood now that safety had a cost. In the days leading up to it, Daniel didn't try to eliminate fear. He let it exist. He prepared, practiced, and reminded himself of one truth that had become his anchor: courage does not mean confidence is complete, it means it is growing. When the moment arrived, his body reacted as it always had. His heart pounded. His breath shortened. But he stayed. He spoke. He allowed imperfection to exist without letting it silence him. The outcome was not flawless. He made mistakes. He felt exposed. But when it ended, he felt something far more powerful than relief. He felt ownership. He had faced the very thing that once defined his limitations and refused to let it define him again. The applause mattered less than the internal shift that followed. He no longer saw himself as someone trying to become confident. He saw himself as someone who trusted himself enough to try. From that point forward, Daniel's life unfolded differently, not because obstacles disappeared, but because his response to them changed. Rejection no longer crushed him. Failure no longer felt final. He stopped measuring his worth by external reactions and started measuring it by his willingness to act despite fear. His relationships grew healthier because he showed up honestly. His work improved because he stopped hiding behind caution. Years later, Daniel reflected on the life he almost lived. A life of quiet compromise and unrealized potential. He understood then that self-confidence is not loud or aggressive or perfect. It is the quiet decision to stand by yourself when doubt speaks loudly. It is choosing progress over comfort, truth over approval, and action over fear. And once that choice is made consistently, everything changes, not because the world becomes easier, but because you become stronger. Daniel once believed his life would always exist on the edges, never fully seen, never fully heard. Not because he lacked ability, but because he lacked belief. The memory of standing frozen on that stage still lived inside him, not as pain anymore, but as a reminder of who he used to be. Back then, fear dictated his choices so quietly that he mistook it for logic. He told himself he was being realistic, careful, patient. In truth, he was avoiding the risk of being judged, misunderstood, or exposed. Fear felt safer than failure, even though it slowly drained the color from his life. Long before that moment on stage, Daniel had learned to doubt himself. Each time he hesitated to speak, each time he let someone interrupt him, each time he accepted less than he wanted, another layer of self-trust eroded. Confidence didn't disappear overnight. It faded gradually, like a voice drowned out by constant noise. He became skilled at staying unnoticed. People described him as calm and easygoing, unaware that beneath that calm lived a constant battle between who he was and who he believed he was allowed to be. After the public failure, Daniel could no longer pretend that shrinking himself was harmless. The humiliation hurt, but the realization hurt more. He saw clearly that his biggest loss was not the opportunity he missed, but the years he had spent standing in his own way. He began to understand that self-confidence was not something he was missing, but something he had never practiced. And like any muscle, it had weakened from lack of use. He started small, not because small steps felt safe, but because they felt possible. Speaking up once a day. Holding eye contact a few seconds longer. Expressing disagreement without immediately softening it. These moments were uncomfortable and awkward. His heart raced. His thoughts scattered. But nothing catastrophic happened. The world did not collapse because he spoke. People did not reject him for existing honestly. Slowly, evidence replaced assumption. There were setbacks. Days when old habits resurfaced and self-doubt felt overwhelming. Moments when criticism cut deeper than expected. In those moments, Daniel wanted to retreat, to return to the familiar comfort of silence. But he noticed something different now. Even when he stumbled, he no longer saw himself as weak. He saw himself as learning. That shift changed everything. Failure stopped being a verdict and became feedback. As his inner world changed, his outer world responded. He noticed how people listened more closely when he spoke with conviction, even if his words were simple. He noticed how boundaries earned respect, not rejection. He noticed how confidence did not require loudness, only clarity. The more he trusted himself, the less he needed constant reassurance. Approval became optional instead of essential. Daniel eventually realized that fear never truly left. It showed up before every important step, every risk, every moment of growth. But it no longer controlled him. He stopped seeing fear as a sign to stop and started seeing it as a sign that something meaningful was happening. Confidence was not the absence of fear, it was the willingness to move forward anyway. When he faced challenges that once would have broken him, he responded differently. He prepared instead of panicking. He acted instead of avoiding. He forgave himself instead of criticizing endlessly. Life still tested him, but now he trusted his ability to respond. That trust became his foundation. Years passed, and Daniel often thought about how easily his life could have remained small. Not because he lacked opportunity, but because he lacked belief. He understood now that self-confidence is not arrogance, not perfection, not certainty. It is self-respect in action. It is choosing to show up as you are, even when you feel unready. It is the courage to take responsibility for your own life. The most powerful change was invisible. Daniel no longer waited for permission to exist fully. He no longer postponed his life until he felt ready. He understood that readiness comes after action, not before it. Confidence followed movement, not the other way around. Looking back, Daniel knew the moment everything changed was not the applause or success that came later. It was the quiet decision he made after failing, when no one was watching. The decision to stop betraying himself. That single choice, repeated daily, reshaped his identity. And that is the true power of self-confidence. It doesn't promise an easy life. It promises an honest one. It doesn't remove obstacles. It removes the belief that you cannot overcome them. When you trust yourself, even imperfectly, life opens in ways fear never allows. Daniel used to think that confidence was something visible, something you could clearly point at in other people and say, they have it, I don't. He believed it lived in posture, volume, certainty. He believed it belonged to people who were never afraid. What he didn't understand for a long time was that confidence often begins in silence, in the private moments when no one is watching and a person decides whether they will stand with themselves or turn away again. For years, Daniel had practiced turning away. Each time he doubted his instincts, each time he chose comfort over truth, he taught himself that his inner voice was unreliable. Over time, he stopped listening to it altogether. Decisions became guided by fear disguised as logic. He told himself he was avoiding disappointment, avoiding conflict, avoiding embarrassment. What he was really avoiding was growth. His life moved forward on the surface, but inside, he felt strangely untouched by it, like an observer instead of a participant. The memory of freezing on stage never fully disappeared, but its meaning changed. At first, it represented humiliation. Later, it became a warning. Eventually, it turned into motivation. Daniel realized that moment wasn't proof that he was weak, it was proof that he had reached the edge of who he was pretending to be. Something inside him wanted more, even if fear had taken control in that instant. That realization planted a quiet determination that refused to leave. He began paying attention to how often he abandoned himself in small ways. How often he laughed at jokes he didn't find funny. How often he agreed just to keep the peace. How often he stayed silent to avoid standing out. None of these moments felt significant on their own, but together they formed a pattern. A pattern of self-betrayal. And Daniel understood that confidence would not grow until that pattern changed. So he started practicing honesty, first with himself, then with others. He admitted when he didn't understand something. He shared ideas before they felt perfect. He allowed himself to be seen in an unfinished state. This was terrifying at first. Vulnerability felt like exposure. But over time, he noticed that being imperfect and present was far less painful than being perfect and invisible. There were moments when the old fear surged back strongly, moments when doubt whispered that he was doing too much, saying too much, asking for too much. In the past, those whispers would have stopped him. Now, he listened without obeying. He learned that thoughts are not commands, and fear is not prophecy. Just because his mind predicted rejection did not mean it would happen. And even if it did, he was discovering that he could survive it. As Daniel grew more grounded in himself, his priorities shifted. He stopped chasing validation and started valuing alignment. He noticed that some people drifted away as he changed, while others drew closer. This used to scare him, but now he accepted it as natural. Confidence clarified his life. It revealed which connections were built on convenience and which were built on respect. He also learned to separate his worth from outcomes. When things went well, he allowed himself to feel proud without becoming dependent on praise. When things went poorly, he resisted the urge to tear himself apart. He asked better questions. What can I learn? What can I do differently next time? This approach didn't remove disappointment, but it transformed it into fuel instead of a verdict. One of the most powerful shifts happened when Daniel stopped waiting to feel confident before acting. He understood now that confidence follows action, not the other way around. Each time he acted despite fear, he sent a message to himself, I can be trusted. And that message slowly rewired how he saw himself. Daniel no longer measured his life by the moments when things went perfectly. He measured it by the moments when fear showed up and he chose not to disappear. That shift took years, not days. It happened quietly, in ordinary moments that would never make a highlight reel. Moments like choosing to speak even when his voice felt thin. Moments like walking into unfamiliar rooms without rehearsing excuses in his head. Moments like forgiving himself for not being who he thought he should have been sooner. There was a time when Daniel believed confidence would arrive all at once, like a switch flipping inside him. He waited for it. He prepared for it. He imagined a future version of himself who would finally feel ready. But that version never came. What came instead was a realization that waiting was costing him his life. Every postponed decision, every avoided risk, every swallowed truth was a vote for a smaller existence. And once he saw that clearly, he couldn't unsee it. Confidence, he learned, is built through evidence. Evidence that you can face discomfort and survive it. Evidence that mistakes do not define you. Evidence that your worth does not disappear when someone disagrees with you. Every time Daniel kept a promise to himself, no matter how small, he added to that evidence. Every time he acted with integrity instead of fear, trust in himself deepened. Slowly, the voice of self-doubt lost its authority. It still spoke, but it no longer made the final decision. He also learned that self-confidence required responsibility. Not the heavy, punishing kind, but the empowering kind. Responsibility for his choices, his reactions, his growth. He stopped blaming his past for his present. Not because his past didn't matter, but because he refused to let it decide his future. This wasn't easy. There were days when old memories resurfaced, days when insecurity felt overwhelming. On those days, confidence meant showing up anyway, without demanding that the feeling be perfect first. Daniel began to notice how much energy he had wasted trying to control how others saw him. Once he released that need, something remarkable happened. He became more natural. More grounded. Less divided inside. He realized that confidence is not about convincing the world of your value, but about no longer needing the world's permission to believe in it yourself. That internal alignment created a calm strength that others could feel, even if they couldn't explain it. As his confidence grew, so did his compassion. He recognized fear in others because he knew it so well in himself. He stopped competing and started connecting. He listened without shrinking and spoke without attacking. Confidence softened him instead of hardening him. It allowed him to be firm without being defensive, open without being fragile. This balance became one of the greatest gifts of his transformation. There were still moments of failure. Projects that didn't work out. Conversations he wished he had handled differently. Opportunities that slipped away. But these moments no longer crushed him. He had learned to separate his identity from his outcomes. Failure became something he experienced, not something he was. This distinction protected his confidence and allowed him to keep moving forward without bitterness or regret. Daniel often reflected on how different his life felt now, not because everything was better, but because he was present for it. He no longer lived on pause, waiting for the right moment or the right version of himself. He participated fully, imperfectly, honestly. He took risks that aligned with his values. He made choices that respected his time and energy. He trusted himself to adjust when things went wrong. One of the most powerful lessons he learned was that confidence grows fastest when you stop negotiating with fear. Fear will always offer reasons to wait, to delay, to settle. Confidence responds with action. Not reckless action, but intentional movement forward. Each step reinforces the belief that you are capable of handling whatever comes next. Over time, this belief becomes unshakable. Looking back, Daniel understood that the turning point in his life was not success, praise, or recognition. It was the moment he decided to stop abandoning himself. That decision changed how he spoke, how he worked, how he loved, how he lived. It gave him back his agency. It reminded him that he was allowed to take up space, to want more, to try again. The power of self-confidence, Daniel realized, is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in consistency, in courage repeated daily, in quiet self-respect. It is the strength to stand alone if necessary, the humility to learn, and the resilience to continue. It doesn't promise certainty, but it offers freedom. And that freedom changed everything.